Okay, so we are recording. Do you want to do number one?
Sure. All right. So the question says discuss the benefits and detriments of family therapy in comparison to individual therapy. And so I had for this, I said family therapy focuses not just on the individual components, rather the organized whole that has interacting parts. It acknowledges that clients have disturbing symptoms. The symptoms function of and are maintained through relationships. So if counseling is effective, the theory believes that the client's primary system, such as the family, is the best treatment to focus on. And so the benefit of this is that there are problems. If there are problems, you work with the families, and the problem is no longer just the focus on the individual. So instead, the problems are created and maintained by the family. It shows that problems are central to the family and must be treated as such. This can be a benefit to cultures such as like the collectivist, Latin, and Eastern um, cultures, and because I feel like these focus on like harmony and peace and all of that kind of stuff. And that's not to say that it doesn't work for individualist cultures, but I think that it really works for them, I guess. Kind of like what we talked about in class. This also means that there's a specific problem. The blame for that problem does not just reside on one individual when going through therapy. This can help families learn and teach them how to cope or strategize effectively when dealing with the problem. So, for my example, I thought about like schizophrenia being really beneficial for this kind of therapy because it takes into account like the family as a whole, because chances are if that person's going to be getting better, it's really focusing on the family and how to cope with them and deal with like their problems and stuff. And so with Adler's individual therapy, he focuses on community and he emphasizes social interests, and that kind of resembles the importance of like other people, but it doesn't really focus on like the family aspects, and like they don't tie in like having the family come and stuff like that. And so Adler mentions striving for superiority and the task of life and stuff. So it's a little bit more individualized and not really directly related to your microsystem, such as your family. I would say the detriments can be that some problems, like we talked about in our lecture, such as affairs, aren't necessarily right for like a family systems. That problem alone is a little bit more direct towards like a specific individual. Although I think family systems can acknowledge like that's going to be affecting like not just one person, it's going to be everybody. So I think that can be beneficial for family therapy to address that situation, but I think it's a little bit more individual. So the problem is like where do you define like the certain line of whether it's an individual or a family problem? And then this can lead to making people feel like they could be blamed for that sort of problem. So that's what I wrote for the first one. Sorry,
You
that was kind of
covered
a
that.
lot.
Yeah, you covered that really well. Said that some of the benefits are you get a broader view of how people are affecting each other, longer lasting change. If you change the whole entire system, you make it a longer lasting, more permanent change. Chance to see if there's agreement within the family members on which dynamics are healthy and which ones are unhealthy. Because if you
Mhm.
just have one person in individual therapy, they could tell you anything, and you don't really have a way to know if that's how other people view it.
Right.
More gets revealed that could be concealed by an individual in individual therapy.
Right.
There's that chance for reenactment among the family members, which can be really powerful.
Mhm.
And you can directly affect each person's home environment because you're doing therapy on all the family members. So rather than just doing therapy on one person, having them go home to whatever, you are actually working on their environment that they're going to be exposed to after therapy by working with their family members.
That's
Those
true.
who are more motivated in family therapy can kind of serve as an aid to motivate the others.
Mhm.
There will be more second order change by addressing underlying patterns that emerge during the sessions.
That's true.
And you can view unhealthy boundaries as they are broken in session. You can watch it happening.
Mhm.
Detriments, I said there's a much higher risk for conflict. It's honestly like a little bit scary to me to think about having like a whole family there and like you don't
Yeah,
know.
me too. When we were writing out like our little thing yesterday, I was like, oh my gosh, if I can't even imagine like with all the little family problems and stuff like that, having them all at once, like if you will, I don't know how that would be effective because everybody would want their say in this and that. So it'd be crazy.
Yeah, maybe that's why they have the co-therapy where you bring in more than one therapist.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
I said another detriment is it's difficult to balance the needs and desires of multiple family members.
Mhm.
You need to be more careful about scapegoating in the session.
That's true.
You may lose sight of problem content as you seek to see the bigger picture. You might really lose sight of something that is very problematic.
Mhm.
There are more people to try to motivate all at once and harder for the therapist to develop empathy for multiple people. I think
That's
if you're
also
trying
true. I
to kind
didn't think
of,
that.
yeah, feel empathy for everyone.
That's a big one. Yeah. Because you can only focus on so much or catch so much problems that, yeah, you probably would lack a lot of someone's problems to consider, I guess. Those are all good.
Number two, compare and contrast structural and strategic family therapies. So I put a lot of the components of structural therapy are dealing with the homeostasis of the family, the subsystems, boundaries, coalitions, making organizational changes in those families and changing boundaries, discovering the power dynamics and then changing them to rebalance them, that the
Mhm.
therapist adjusts themselves to foster trust, which is mimesis, the concept of family mapping, restructuring through unbalancing. Um, well, there's lots of ways to restructure, right? Because you can unbalance, you can intensify, and you can reframe things to help generate more empathy in the family.
Mhm.
Whereas in strategic therapy, insight isn't necessarily needed to affect change. You just follow the guidance of the therapist. It's almost like a fake it till you make it,
Mhm.
because they are the primary change mechanism and they use their power to identify solutions that the family are trying to use that aren't working. So the solutions that the family is already thinks are solutions, but really they're not because they're not effective. You're
Right.
identifying those so that you can change those.
Mhm.
And then some of those weird paradoxical strategies like prescribing the symptom, exaggerating a family member's position to make it less palatable. And then another difference between structural and strategic, it sounded like from our textbook, is that the therapist does a lot of self-disclosure and models congruence for the family. That one, strategic, also de-emphasizes pathology, um, and then, in favor of like human validation through modifying the communication of the family.
Yeah. Yeah, you did really good. You hit everything that I pretty much wrote also. Yeah, so I just said, I mean, you hit all of it, but yeah, so structural family therapy is focused on homeostasis, subsystem boundaries, and coalition. It focuses on these and how they are related to the family organization and functioning. Overall, it focuses primarily on changing the organizational structure of families. This means creating a path for new behavior through organizational changes to the family's dysfunctional power hierarchies and boundary structures. So, the therapist would take a directive role through he would want to emphasize like trust and kinship and stuff like that because that's essential to this approach, with the goal intended to change the family behavior or whatever that's happening the problem is. Being adaptive and connected as well as accommodating to the cultural diversity is also important. This therapy views family therapy built on the principle that family members behavior is a function of a family structure. Changing the structure to have a growth for the members of adjusting membership hierarchies and boundaries to facilitate changes in structure. And then by doing so, can understand like the rigid and diffused relational styles and examine boundaries. Um, Structures hope to include a parental unit to lead, and then they should have some sort of clear boundary for their children's system. So avoiding too rigid or diffuse boundaries is important for preventing coalition and then conflict. And mimesis, I don't know if I'm saying that right, or joining the family to identify scapegoating, like you said, and then who holds power, and then um, yeah. So like you said, also you can use techniques such as the unbalancing, intensifying, and then reframing. And then what I said for strategic is family therapy. This family therapy believes insight is not needed, Rather, families can change by following just the therapist's guidance. When it comes to this approach, the therapist is the primary change by using their expertise and their power for the family's change. They observe relationships, the communication, their problem solving skills, and it is assumed that these problem solving skills are ineffective. So the strategic therapist identifies the inadequate solution or inadequate problems and then facilitates change. This doesn't require insight, like you said. And then um, the technique is the paradoxical directives to disrupt the patterns that are causing the problems. And then also, you can prescribe the symptom, you can use positioning, and that can create change as well. So that's what I wrote for it.
Very, yeah, for only 4 questions, I think we actually had quite a bit to write on these.
Yeah, I thought they were pretty brief, but I just didn't know. So you just want to go in depth and make sure you hit all the points because there's a lot to unpack on all of those questions. Okay, so the third question, based on I don't know how to say that name, the model. What level is most family systems therapy working on? Discuss how you could work on the exosystem and macrosystem in meaningful ways to promote mental health in the world, and then be specific about these activities. So I said family system therapy is working on our microsystem. The exosystem can include people who interact with our microsystem, such as the people that are employing our parents or extended family or something like the mass media. Something I thought about is important to our mental health is the mass media. I feel like a lot of times this is such a huge influence, and it impacts a lot of people in different ways because the expectations from social media is like everybody seems perfect and there's no struggles for them, and we compare a lot to that. Um, I just think that the exosystem and everything it's composed of directly influences families. So I also thought about another example would be um, a spouse's job interfering with their behavior. So if it's like they've got a lot of stuff to do, and so they're going to be stressed out, contributing from the job, and then that spouse comes home's cranky, and then they treat their children and their spouse really bad, and so I think this impacts the ecosystem obviously, or sorry, the impact of the ecosystem is clear. So like if the therapist can address this, um, then we can manage to teach our children probably how to be supportive, and then also the spouse learns how to deal and cope with like their cranky spouse coming home from work. And so I think advocating for a better relationship between administration and employees can help ensure a good work environment, and therefore this can address that problem hopefully in a more effective way. And then I wrote down for macro system, this would include individual cultures, laws, politics, and socioeconomics in the region that you're in. So cultures are obviously very important and they impact all of us. And so by addressing this and staying aware and being multiculturally diverse as a therapist can be important for your client. And so I think about politics, and like this year I just thought about like how the politics was crazy on top of a pandemic. And so a lot of people's mental health are struggling right now. And so I think working on understanding how this impacts your client if they were struggling with something like this, um, you can possibly encourage them to partake in voting, to care for hopefully a leader that is supportive of like mental health and something like that. So that would be something to hopefully create a change in your macro system.
So I said also that the microsystem is the one word to describe what family systems therapy mostly works on. As far as making our exosystems healthier, we could implement universal healthcare. A lot of people are stuck in their job because which a lot of people are stuck in a job which is ruining their mental health because they must provide healthcare for their loved ones, and so they don't have a choice.
Mhm.
We can have stricter regulations on misinformation that's in social media. I mean, they're starting to do that. You know, Facebook is starting to take things down or to label it
Right.
not true.
Mhm.
But that would help people to not get so invested in conspiracy theories that it threatens their own mental health because they think
Right.
things are happening that aren't happening.
Mhm.
We could stop glorifying overtime in people's work because studies show from other countries, like Northern European countries mostly, that longer work hours do not necessarily lead to more productivity, but it
Right.
does really mess up your work-life balance,
Mhm.
and it leads to more stress and poor health. And then I said for macro systems, we could improve them by allowing our boys to be more sensitive and not censoring, how they feel and how they act, especially as they approach puberty. And we kind of give them a really rigid box to fit in on, what's okay for men's expressive emotions in our culture.
Mhm. That's a good one.
Yeah, we could look more honestly at ourselves and the things that we do to objectify women, because I think
Yeah,
everyone says like, "Oh, I don't objectify women," but then they're really keeping those systems in place in their own
that's
ways.
so true. Mhm.
We could enact campaign finance reform so that candidates don't have to sell their soul in order to run for office and get in office. We could
That's
stop gerrymandering so that the will of the people is reflected in our political bodies rather than just the most extremes winning because they're really catering to these artificial lines that don't exist.
Mhm.
We could shorten our campaign cycle so that we don't have these long, long negative campaigns that are just sowing hatred in our
Yeah,
commercials for
causes
months.
so much divide and struggle between everybody. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Number four, discuss our case for the week, cover the following ideas. Boundaries. So, what I said about boundaries is that they allow us to experience closeness with others without becoming codependent.
Mhm.
Humans are social animals, and so we must have and keep boundaries in place. Modeling boundaries for ourselves allows our children to grow up knowing how healthy boundaries look like, how to make them, how to maintain them with others.
Mhm.
Healthy boundaries allow us to not overextend ourselves, and if we don't overextend ourselves, then we can be healthy and available for those when they actually do need us, and be there for ourselves too to keep ourselves healthy.
Mhm. I agree.
Alliances are sought when we need to ease our distress over feeling that we are the only one who sees the situation in the way that we do. We are calmed by bringing in another person to affirm our perspective. And then the people in the alliance support each other. And then this can cause the boundaries between them to become more diffuse in an unhealthy way,
Mhm.
because sometimes an alliance can be in the form of a coalition that is against a third person, but another way that an alliance can happen is by triangulation, where two people in a family pull in a third person to sort of distract them and use that third person to ignore the issues that need to be dealt with between the two people.
Mhm.
Roles and rules. Every family has rules and rules for typical and recurring behavior within a family. I tried really hard to come up with my own examples because there were a whole bunch of examples in the textbook. So roles are what someone can be expected to do most of the time. Examples might be the punctual one, the bossy one, the intelligent one. Rules are how people behave in order to support the unique homeostasis of how a family normally behaves. Rules might include don't talk to dad when he's watching sports, don't expect mom to wash the dishes, or don't yell when you're angry.
Yep, those are all good. So I wrote kind of like in regards to like our conceptualization about these. So I didn't necessarily explain them, but I kind of like applied them to Alice's situation. And so I said boundaries for Alice are dysfunctional. And I would say that Alice can sometimes probably have both rigid and diffused, and depending on who you're looking at and like what context or what situation. But I said an example when her boundaries are diffused can be explained when Alice's mother is absent and inconsistent in her parenting. There are a lot of like marital problems in her mother's relationship with her stepfather, and this kind of overwhelms their situation. Her mother also has been diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, so she's kind of very unstable. And so sometimes Alice's mother can be very loving. However, a lot of the time she's quite mean and aggressive and treats Alice like a peer. And so this leads to diffuse boundaries that aren't necessarily clear and they're not really defined. And a lot of the times, this just ends up as so many problems for them to like bat at, I guess. And then for alliances, I wrote about the triangulation between Alice's parents and herself. And so I said Alice's parents have a lot of issues. And aside from the issues, they also do have problems with Alice as well. And a lot of times when Alice is acting up or there's some sort of conflict, her mother and father will join together and then focus on Alice to kind of relieve their situation. And so they ignore their own struggles and they come together and they place all their energy into Alice's problem. And then after they're done arguing, Alice may do something such as self harm or whatever the case may be to get them to stop fighting. And so this makes the parents shift their focus on their daughter's troubles instead of their own troubles when they're fighting about something else. Um, and then they kind of come to a level of connection and they want to come together for their daughter's sake. And according to the book, this is because it's easier for them to kind of focus on someone lower in the hierarchy, the family hierarchy. And so, yeah, that's what I wrote for that. And then for roles and rules, I said Alice's mother is kind of absent. So you could probably write that down for that. And then she doesn't do much parenting and she argues a lot. So she's pretty reactive. And then she's also very unstable because potentially her mental disorder could signify that, I guess. And then for his stepfather, I would say he's the disciplinary because a lot of times he has to take over for Alice's mother because she isn't really there to like parent Alice. And then I'd also say that he's the breadwinner because he's providing all the financials because he's the only one with a steady job. And then he's also a bit reactive as well because he has a lot of anger issues and arguments that arise because of him. And then as for Alice, I would say she's reactive as well. She can be a troublemaker in the eyes of like her school, her peers, or like her family. And then I also would say that she's a caretaker as well because her brother seems to like rely on her a lot when there's problems in the family. And then for covert rules, I said don't talk to mother about the drug problems or don't talk to her about when she's unstable, and then don't talk to the stepdad about the anger issues, and then if you need something you can ask grandma or something like that. And then for over rules, I said she needs permission to dye her hair. So yeah, that's what I wrote for those.
Awesome. I think we covered it all.
Yeah, we did good. All right.